On November 18, 1942, above Henderson Field in Guadalcanal, a Japanese Zero pilot gripped his control stick tightly. He observed American fighters with twin booms rising from Henderson Field. On this day, pilots from the 339th Fighter Squadron made history as the first Lightning pilots to engage Japanese fighters. This moment shattered Japanese beliefs about air supremacy. The Japanese pilot later reported to his squadron commander in Rabaul about this shocking sight. American P-38 Lightning fighters, which Japanese intelligence had dismissed as slow and clumsy, climbed from sea level to combat altitude faster than his Mitsubishi A6M20. In China, in the Philippines, and over Pearl Harbor, the Zero had dominated the skies. No Allied fighter could match its climb rate or agility. Yet above this battle-scarred island, American pilots in their twin-engine fighters controlled the engagement from heights the Zero struggled to reach. In this initial combat encounter, the P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron shot down 3 Japanese aircraft. They attacked from altitudes that rendered the Zero's famed turning ability ineffective. The dynamics of aerial dominance were changing, not through dogfighting manuals, but through the stark reality of superior altitude performance. This shift would soon challenge every assumption Japanese pilots had about their superiority, their aircraft, and their opponents. The confidence of the rising sun was beginning to falter. The decline of Japanese air dominance had started long before this November day, though no one in the Imperial Japanese Navy recognized it. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese naval aviators had flown across the Pacific with an air of invincibility. The Mitsubishi A6M0, with its remarkable range, tight turning radius, and skilled pilots, had built a fearsome reputation. Its maximum speed of 332 miles per hour at its best altitude seemed impressive. Its ability to outmaneuver any Allied fighter made it lethal in traditional dogfights. Among these elite pilots was Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai. He was a holder of multiple victories, a veteran of the China campaign, and a survivor of numerous battles. By 1942, he had achieved 13 victories in the Borneo campaign alone. After this, he was sent to Lille, New Guinea, where he would earn most of his eventual 64 claimed victories. His confidence was unwavering, much like that of his fellow pilots. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, Sakai's immediate superior, briefed his pilots prior to their combat missions. The American fighters over the Guadalcanal area were known to have come from aircraft carriers supporting the invasion. They were likely regular American Navy fighters, not Army planes. The Japanese pilots anticipated facing carrier-based F-4F Wildcats, planes they had defeated in the past. The early months of 1942 reinforced the notion of Japanese superiority. Japanese pilots shot down outdated Brewster Buffalo fighters over Singapore, destroyed Curtiss P-40 Warhawks over Java, and overcame British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero enjoyed near-total dominance in the Pacific theater at that time. Even when engaged with newer Allied fighters, Japanese pilots retained their psychological advantage through superior training and tactics honed over years of conflict in China. However, intelligence reports trickling back to Japanese squadrons in mid-1942 hinted at a new American fighter that was distinct. It featured twin engines, twin tails, and heavy armament concentrated in the nose. Most squadron commanders dismissed these reports. They could not fathom how a twin-engine fighter could possibly challenge the agile Zero. Japanese naval doctrine, centered on decisive battles and individual combat skills, lacked the framework to comprehend this new threat. Then the Lightning appeared. The P-38 Lightning was the only truly effective twin-engine daytime fighter of the war. It resulted from Lockheed's response to a 1937 United States Army Air Corps specification for a long-range interceptor. Designer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his team produced something unprecedented. This fighter could surpass 400 miles per hour, rise to 40,000 feet, and carry enough fuel for missions exceeding 1,000 miles. The P-38's twin Allison V710 engines, each generating 150 horsepower with turbo supercharging, offered performance characteristics that seemed beyond the capabilities of Japanese engineers. While the Zero was designed for optimal maneuverability and minimum weight, it notably lacked armor protection. With self-sealing fuel tanks in early versions, the Lightning embodied a completely different philosophy. It prioritized speed, altitude, firepower, and survivability. The first P-38s arrived in the Pacific Theater not with celebration, but with technical issues. Upon their arrival in Australia, they were found to have design flaws, delaying their combat debut. However, by late 1942, these problems were being addressed, and seasoned pilots from P-40 squadrons began transitioning to the new fighter. The 49th Fighter Group still used P-40s, but would soon switch to the Lightning. These pilots brought valuable experience from engagements with Japanese fighters. They had learned, often through fatal mistakes, never to engage a Zero in a turning battle. The P-38 would provide them the means to fight on their own terms. The first major engagement over the Solomons took place on November 18, 1942. The Lightning confronted Japanese fighters when pilots from the 339th Fighter Squadron, flying from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, escorted Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. The outcome shocked both sides. Japanese pilots escorting their bombers first noticed the unusual twin-boomed silhouettes climbing from the south. They were puzzled at first. Were these bombers or reconnaissance aircraft? Their climb rate suggested otherwise. By the time they identified them as fighters, the P-38s had already achieved a 5,000-foot altitude advantage. The P-38s patrolled at altitudes too high for the Zero to operate effectively. Their incredible speed at high altitudes allowed them to position themselves advantageously. Then, the large fighters would dive from the sky to attack the unsuspecting Zero fighters. The numbers were clear. The Zero's low-speed agility was legendary, but it struggled at high speeds compared to the P-38. Above 250 miles per hour, the Zero's controls became heavier. Beyond 300 miles per hour, maneuvering the aircraft became a challenge. The P-38, equipped with hydraulically boosted controls in later versions, retained its effectiveness even in high-speed dives nearing 500 miles per hour. The technological gap was significant. For Japanese pilots, the shock extended beyond mere performance statistics. The P-38 represented a radically different approach to aerial combat that the Japanese military culture had not anticipated. The P-38 Lightning was equipped with 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon located in the nose. This setup allowed for powerful and focused fire without needing complicated gun convergence calculations like those of wing-mounted weapons. Its turbo-supercharged engines were revolutionary for Japanese pilots. The P-38 could perform well at high altitudes while keeping its operations relatively quiet. Often, Japanese pilots did not hear the P-38 approaching until it was too late. The Nakajima Sakai engine in the Zero produced 950 horsepower at sea level, but its power dropped sharply with altitude. By 20,000 feet, it only generated about 750 horsepower. In contrast, the turbo-supercharged Allison engines of the P-38 maintained their power at greater altitudes. This gave the P-38 a significant advantage in vertical aerial combat. By early 1943, the psychological impact on Japanese pilots became clear in squadron reports and personal letters. The myth of the Zero's invincibility was fading. Pilots felt constant tension, aware that a P-38 could strike from anywhere. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima faced a notorious double-team maneuver. Two Grumman Wildcats attacked his plane. He managed to get on the tail of one but could not fire before another aircraft closed in from the side. Furious, he returned to Rabaul after having to dive to safety. This encounter with Wildcats was mild compared to what the P-38 would present. Saburo Sakai later recognized that Zero fighters could no longer effectively engage P-38s except under rare conditions, which rarely occurred. This acknowledgement from Japan's top ace weighed heavily on the pilot community. The situation was even graver than individual combat statistics indicated. The P-38's impressive range allowed it to appear across the vast Pacific theater. With a range of 1,600 miles, thanks to drop tanks, the Lightning could escort bombers deep into Japanese territory or conduct fighter sweeps far from American bases. Pilots could no longer rely on their numerical advantage over their own territory. The mission of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was a prime example. Nothing showcased the P-38's superiority quite like Operation Vengeance on April 18, 1943. That day, 16 P-38s embarked on a 435-mile interception mission to take down Yamamoto. The mission demanded accurate navigation over water, extensive range, and the ability to engage both bombers and their fighter escorts. Major John Mitchell led the operation. The aircraft flew just 50 feet above the ocean to evade radar detection. Then, they quickly ascended to the interception altitude. The psychological blow to Japanese naval aviation was immense. Their most respected leader, traveling with 6 Zero escorts, had been hunted and killed by American fighters at the very edge of their operational range. Kenji Yanaga, a Zero pilot in Yamamoto's escort, witnessed the attack. His account revealed the shock among Japanese pilots regarding the P-38's capabilities. The Lightning pilots seemingly appeared from nowhere. They executed their strike with pinpoint accuracy and escaped before the Zero escorts could mount an effective response. The American pilots timed the interception perfectly, arriving just as Yamamoto's flight was most vulnerable, preparing to land. This level of detailed planning, combined with the P-38's performance, showcased a capability that Japan could not match. As 1943 continued, American pilots fine-tuned their tactics to take full advantage of the P-38. The boom and zoom attack became standard. This involved diving from altitude to strike, and then climbing back up before the enemy could react. Japanese pilots found themselves defenseless against these tactics. In the first air-to-air encounter between Japanese forces and the P-38, 15 Japanese planes were shot down compared to just one P-38. These one-sided victories became more frequent as American pilots gained more experience with the P-38. The Japanese tried several countermeasures. They attempted to use dive breaks to force American pilots into overshooting attacks. They also tried to lure P-38s into low-altitude dogfights. Some even developed new loose formations to spot incoming threats better. None of these strategies worked consistently. The performance gap was simply too significant. The situation reflected a deeper truth about American industrial strength that Japanese pilots were just beginning to realize. By the end of the war, more than 10,000 P-38 aircraft would be produced in 18 different models, showcasing continuous advancements. Each new model aimed to fix weaknesses and boost strengths based on what had been learned in combat. The P-38J model, released in late 1943, included hydraulically boosted ailerons to enhance roll rate. It also addressed cockpit heating issues seen in earlier models and had improved turbo superchargers for better performance at higher altitudes. Meanwhile, Japanese aircraft development was struggling to make significant upgrades to the Zero design. Captain Minoru Gender, a key strategist behind the Pearl Harbor attack, privately confessed to colleagues in mid-1943, "We are not just battling a better fighter. We are up against an unending cycle of improvement that we cannot match. Each new American fighter we confront is superior to the last." The pilots experienced a widening gap. The technological disparity was exacerbated by the declining quality of Japanese pilots. By mid-1943, Japan was losing experienced pilots faster than they could replace them. The harsh reality was sinking in that Japan could not adequately replace losses in both materials and expertise. Training programs were cut from 2 years to under 6 months. New pilots were entering combat units with fewer than 200 flight hours. In contrast, American pilots typically had between 400 and 600 hours of training. They had honed combat tactics in advanced training units, analyzed gun camera footage from real battles, and trained on various aircraft models. When they moved to P-38s, they received specialized training in twin-engine operations and high-altitude combat tactics. The P-38's twin-engine setup provided another edge that Japanese pilots did not fully understand: survivability. Even severely damaged P-38s could return home on one propeller. This reliability had a significant psychological effect. Japanese pilots in single-engine planes faced certain death if their engine failed, especially over vast oceans. The Zero's extensive range came at the expense of minimal armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. One bullet in a critical area could lead to a fiery end or a long swim with sharks. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence was warning pilots. Japanese pilots learned to avoid confrontations with the Lightning. They recognized its frightening speed, precision, and ability to appear out of nowhere. Intelligence reports circulated among Japanese squadrons, highlighting their growing awareness of their disadvantage. A captured Japanese document from December 1943 declared that the P-38 fighter was the most dangerous American aircraft in the Pacific. It noted that its speed and climb rate surpassed anything the Japanese could manage. They concluded that engagements should be avoided unless they had overwhelming numbers and a favorable position. This acknowledgement marked a complete shift from the warrior ideals that defined Japanese naval aviation. The psychological impact was enormous. Pilots, trained to seek out combat, were now instructed to evade the enemy. The rise of American P-38 aces vividly demonstrated the fighter's superiority. Major Richard Bong became America's top ace with 40 victories, all achieved in P-38s. Major Thomas B. McGuire secured 38 victories before his death in January 1945. These accomplishments, reached in less than 2 years of combat, far surpassed what many Japanese aces achieved in 3 or 4 years. Over 1,800 Japanese aircraft fell to P-38s in the Pacific theater. This number represented not only lost aircraft, but also experienced pilots that Japan could not replace. Each victory significantly diminished Japanese air power as training programs failed to produce adequately skilled replacements. As 1944 progressed, the P-38 continued to advance while Japanese aircraft development lagged. The P-38L model featured enhanced engines for greater power at altitude, better cooling systems, and rocket launchers for ground attacks. These aircraft could carry substantial bomb loads alongside their usual weaponry. Japanese pilots observing the P-38's shift from air superiority roles to powerful ground assault missions realized they were up against not just a superior fighter, but an exceptionally versatile weapons system. Beyond these technological advantages, Japanese pilots found it hard to understand the American style of air combat. The Japanese had transformed aerial warfare into an art, focusing on individual talent and the warrior spirit. The Americans approached it as an engineering challenge. They believed that with superior technology and tactics, they could prevail. Commander Masatake Okumiya, a staff officer analyzing combat reports, noted that after the war, they struggled to accept that fighting spirit alone was not enough. Every report highlighting the P-38's advantages led to demands for even greater dedication and a more aggressive approach. They mistakenly equated courage with capability. This cultural misunderstanding hindered their ability to adapt effectively. American pilots consistently improved their tactics based on real combat experience. In contrast, Japanese training focused on aerobatic skills and individual combat talent, which proved ineffective against an enemy that would not engage on those terms. By mid-1944, some P-38s had primitive airborne radar for nighttime operations. This technology was well beyond Japanese capabilities to match or counter. Nighttime had once provided a safe haven for Japanese missions. Now, even darkness offered no refuge. Although the P-38 did not directly engage in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, its influence was evident. The quality of the Japanese pilots facing the United States Navy's Hellcats was affected. Years of attrition against P-38s and other American fighters had worn down Japan's experienced pilots. The Marianas Turkey Shoot marked the height of this process. American pilots shot down more than 300 Japanese aircraft while suffering minimal losses. Vice Admiral Tao Ozawa, who led the Japanese carrier forces, later acknowledged that their pilots were not prepared. They lacked both the experience and aircraft to compete with the Americans. It was clear the war in the skies had been lost long before that day. As 1944 transitioned into 1945, Japanese efforts to counter the P-38 grew increasingly desperate. They experimented with ramming attacks, understanding that traditional combat was futile. They developed phosphorus anti-aircraft shells aimed specifically at the P-38's fuel tanks. They even tried to create their own twin-engine fighters, but none reached operational status in significant numbers. The Kawasaki Ki-102, Japan's attempt at a comparable twin-engine fighter, showcased the technological divide. While the P-38 had been in service since 1941, The Key 102 only entered service in 1945, and just 238 were produced. It was slower than the P-38, climbed poorly, and had persistent engine problems. By early 1945, Japanese pilots no longer discussed air superiority or even equality in the skies. Their focus shifted to survival. The P-38 Lightning, alongside other American fighters, had gained total control over Japanese airspace. Saburo Sakai remarked that the P-38 crushed the morale of the Zero fighter pilots. The statistics reveal a clear picture. The records of P-38 operations in the Pacific showcase overwhelming dominance. Over 1,800 Japanese aircraft were destroyed by P-38s. Major Richard Bong achieved 40 victories, all flying P-38s. Major Thomas Maguire secured 38 victories in the same aircraft. P-38 pilots claimed more Japanese aircraft than any other Army Air Force fighter. In stark contrast, Japanese loss rates painted a grim reality. By the end of the war, Japan had lost more than 90% of its experienced pilots from the start. The average Japanese pilot in 1945 had less than 100 hours of flight time. They were not warriors. They were sacrificial lambs sent to fight an enemy they could not defeat. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces conducted numerous interviews with surviving Japanese pilots and commanders. These discussions uncovered the significant psychological impact of the P-38. Commander Masatake Okumiya confessed, "The P-38 broke our confidence completely. We believed in our superiority, in our aircraft, in our training. The Lightning showed us we were wrong about everything. It was not just faster or better armed. It represented a way of war we couldn't match." One Japanese pilot shared, "In my first confrontation with the P-38, I was shocked to find an American aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive the Zero, which we thought was the most superior fighter plane in the world." Post-war technical analysis highlighted the performance gap. The Mitsubishi A6M20 had a maximum speed of 332 miles per hour at its critical altitude. Its service ceiling was 33,000 feet, but it struggled to perform above 25,000 feet. Its climb rate was 3,100 feet per minute, rapidly declining with altitude. Its range was 1,930 miles, exceptional for its time. The armament included two 7.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons with limited ammunition. The early models had no armor and lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. In comparison, the Lockheed P-38L Lightning reached maximum speeds of over 400 miles per hour. Its service ceiling was 44,000 feet. Its climb rate was 4,750 feet per minute at sea level. The range was 1,600 miles with drop tanks, and its armament included 50 caliber machine guns. The P-38 Lightning featured advanced machine guns, a 120mm cannon, and extensive pilot protection with self-sealing fuel tanks. The data clearly showed a significant disparity. The Japanese Zero was built for a different type of warfare. It focused on individual skill and agility to win battles. In contrast, the P-38 symbolized warfare of the industrial age. It relied on technology, production capability, and systematic improvements to determine success. The superiority of the P-38 showcased the industrial strength of the United States, which far surpassed that of Japan. Lockheed manufactured over 10,000 P-38s during the war. Japan produced around 10,000 Zeros, but this production spanned a longer timeline and deteriorated in quality as the conflict continued. American production methods, which used assembly line techniques honed from automobile manufacturing, allowed for P-38s to be made faster than Japan could train its pilots. Each P-38 was made up of thousands of highly specialized components created to exact standards. This level of industrial coordination was something Japan could not duplicate. The Allison engines in the P-38 exemplified engineering excellence, featuring supercharging technology and precise manufacturing that Japan could not match. While Japanese engines needed extensive manual adjustments, American engines were largely interchangeable, which made maintenance simpler and more reliable. The difference in training was stark. By 1944, the gap in pilot training had widened significantly. American P-38 pilots underwent extensive twin-engine training. They completed over 100 hours on twin-engine trainers before flying a P-38. They learned engine failure procedures, how to manage uneven thrust, high-altitude physiology, and oxygen system management. They practiced gunnery using camera guns and towed targets. They were trained in formation tactics and support procedures, as well as escape and evasion strategies. They also gained a comprehensive knowledge of their aircraft systems. In contrast, by 1944, Japanese training consisted of basic flight instruction ranging from 50 to 100 hours. Their training included minimal combat tactics and limited gunnery practice due to scarce ammunition. There was no specialized high-altitude training. The focus was on spirit rather than tactical doctrine, often preparing pilots for special attack kamikaze missions. The outcome was clear. American pilots arrived in combat zones as skilled professionals, while Japanese pilots came as inadequately trained sacrifices. The P-38 also drove significant changes in aerial combat tactics. The traditional turning dogfight, which had dominated the skies, was transformed. Since World War I, the P-38 Lightning became a vital force. While the P-38 could not outmaneuver the A-6M0 when flying below 200 miles per hour, its higher speed and strong rate of climb allowed it to utilize energy tactics effectively. American pilots perfected the high side pass. They approached from above and behind, diving through enemy formations with their guns firing, then zooming back to altitude before the enemy could retaliate. This strategy, reliant on the P-38's performance advantages, rendered Japanese defensive formations ineffective. The Japanese tried to adapt by placing fighters at various altitudes. However, this scattered their resources and made coordination impossible. They attempted to use clouds for cover, but the speed of the P-38 let it sweep across great areas, spotting Japanese aircraft even in hiding. The aircraft's unique appearance became a psychological weapon. Its twin boom design seemed strange to Japanese pilots, who initially viewed it as bulky and awkward. Yet this distinctive silhouette soon symbolized American technological dominance, instilling fear in Japanese pilots even before combat began. Ground crews noted that simply hearing rumors of P-38s nearby would lead Japanese pilots to delay missions or request extra escorts. The nickname among Japanese pilots, "Two planes, one pilot," highlighted their confusion regarding its design, as well as their respect for its capabilities. The strategic impact of the P-38 stretched beyond air combat. Japanese military planning counted on rough air parity, allowing their warrior spirit to win. The P-38 showed that technology could grant such an overwhelming advantage that spirit no longer mattered. This insight shifted Japanese strategies, accelerating kamikaze tactics when conventional air combat seemed futile. It led to the withdrawal of seasoned pilots for home defense. By mid-1944, offensive air operations ceased, and resources were diverted to desperate weapon projects. They recognized that the war could not be won by traditional means. Admiral Somu Toyota, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, privately admitted in October 1944, "We no longer have an air force capable of conventional operations. The American fighters, particularly the P-38, have removed our ability to compete in the skies." The complexity of the P-38's twin engines initially worried American planners. However, it showed another advantage: advanced maintenance and logistics capabilities. P-38 squadrons managed operational rates over 80%, even in the challenging conditions of the Pacific. In contrast, Japanese units flying simpler single-engine fighters struggled to reach 50% availability by 1944. American maintenance crews, many coming from civilian aviation and automotive backgrounds, approached aircraft maintenance systematically. They developed specialized tools, standardized procedures, and preventive maintenance schedules. Japanese maintenance, on the other hand, remained traditional, depending on individual skill rather than systematic methods. There was also a significant gap in navigation technology. P-38s, equipped with radio direction finding equipment, could navigate accurately across vast distances in the Pacific. They could home in on radio beacons, locate their bases in poor weather, and execute precise attacks at specific times. Japanese pilots mostly relied on dead reckoning and visual navigation, which limited their flexibility in operations. This advantage in navigation was crucial for long-range missions. The mission to intercept Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto required precise navigation over 435 miles of open ocean, arriving at the exact point on time. Japanese pilots could not have managed such a mission with their existing technology. The impact on Japanese naval aviation was dramatic. The Imperial Japanese Navy had built its strategy around naval aviation. The dominance of the P-38 shattered this foundation. Carrier air groups that had been rebuilt after the losses at the Battle of Midway were devastated by P-38s and other American fighters during the island campaigns. By 1944, Japanese carriers were operating with half-strength air groups made up of poorly trained pilots. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, in command of the First Mobile Fleet, stated before the Battle of the Philippine Sea that their pilots were not prepared to fight against American fighters. He noted they could barely land on carriers and were being sent to certain death. The encounter with the P-38 forced a significant transformation in Japanese military thinking. The Bushido Code, which emphasized spiritual strength and individual warrior prowess, proved insufficient against American industrial warfare. Younger Japanese officers began to question the foundation of their entire military doctrine. This shift in perspective went beyond just the military. Japanese pilots who returned from combat, those few who made it back, shared accounts of American technological strength. These stories contradicted years of propaganda that claimed Western decadence and Japanese superiority. The economic truth was evident. The P-38 program represented an economic commitment that Japan could not match. Each P-38 cost around $97,000 in 1944. This price was high, but America manufactured them in large quantities. Japan struggled to produce its own aircraft, which cost much less in any significant numbers. By 1944, the aluminum needed for a single P-38 was more than what many Japanese factories received in an entire month. The advanced instruments, turbo superchargers, and constant speed propellers were all elements that showcased industrial strengths Japan had never developed. The most compelling evidence of the P-38's impact came from the testimonies of Japanese pilots. These men, trained to avoid admitting defeat, all recognized the superiority of the Lightning in post-war interviews. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai noted that the P-38 could patrol at altitudes beyond the reach of the Zero. Their remarkable speed at those heights allowed them to get into advantageous positions. Then, these powerful fighters would dive from above, striking down the vulnerable Zero fighters. The ultimate disgrace for Japan came not only from combat losses, but also from the P-38's additional functions. P-38 reconnaissance models captured 90% of the aerial photography in the Pacific theater. Japanese positions and movements were continuously watched. The very aircraft that defeated them in battle was documenting their defeat in detail. Japanese commanders found that every action they took was monitored and photographed. The P-38 F-5 photo reconnaissance variant, which was stripped of its weapons but maintained full performance, could photograph Japanese sites freely. Japanese fighters sent to intercept them simply could not reach the altitudes where the P-38 operated. The shock that Japanese pilots felt when faced with the P-38 had lasting effects beyond the war. It shaped post-war Japanese aviation development, military strategies, and even cultural views on technology and tradition. Many surviving Japanese pilots became advocates for technological progress in post-war Japan. They learned that bravery without capability meant nothing. Their experiences shaped Japan's technological and industrial growth after the war. Saburo Sakai, a successful businessman post-war, often discussed the lessons learned from engaging with the P-38. The P-38 taught us that we must not fall behind in technology again. It emphasized that industrial strength, rather than warrior spirit, is what wins modern warfare. The evolution of the P-38 during the war showcased America's advantages in swift technical advancement. Problems encountered in battle were quickly solved in new production models. Dive flaps were developed to address compressibility issues. Improvements in heating systems were made for cold cockpits. Hydraulically boosted ailerons were introduced in response to roll rate complaints. In contrast, Japan's aircraft development was limited by scarce resources and rigid institutions, preventing it from keeping up with this fast-paced progress. The Zero that was in action in 1945 was essentially the same aircraft that attacked Pearl Harbor with few upgrades. Meanwhile, the P-38L of 1945 was significantly better than the P-38E of 1942. General Kenny, who led the Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, stated that the P-38 pilots flying at high altitudes chose when and where they wanted to fight, leading to disastrous outcomes for Japanese pilots. This ability to control the conditions of engagement marked a breakthrough in air combat, which Japanese military doctrine could not effectively counter. The statistics speak for themselves. By the end of the war, the top two American aces had shot down 78 Japanese aircraft, all while flying P-38s. The most successful Japanese ace had 64 victories over 6 years of war. The attrition rate was simply not sustainable for Japan. The P-38's dominance over the Zero signified more than just being technically superior. It reflected deep-rooted differences in military strategies, industrial capability, innovation, culture, and strategic thinking. The Japanese had geared up for a quick, decisive conflict where warrior spirit would triumph over material limitations. In contrast, the P-38 symbolized America's readiness for an extended industrial war, where technology and production would be key. The shock that Japanese pilots felt when confronting the P-38 was truly the shock of facing modernity itself. The P-38 embodied the systematic integration of science, engineering, and industrial management into warfare. The samurai tradition, despite its nobility, could not stand against this reality. The human cost was immense. Behind the numbers and technical details lay profound tragedy. Thousands of young Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 100 hours of flight experience, were dispatched to face the P-38s in outdated aircraft. They understood they had no chance. Letters home, discovered after the war, revealed these young men resigned to their fate. One pilot wrote to his mother before his last mission, saying, "Tomorrow I will confront the twin-tailed devils. I do not expect to return. They soar higher and faster than we can fathom. I will fulfill my duty, yet I know it is futile." He was shot down by P-38s over Rabaul in March 1944. His story was one of countless similar tales. Young lives were lost due to a technological gap that bravery could not overcome. The impact of the P-38 extended well beyond World War II. It shaped the development of aircraft during the Cold War, as both the United States and Soviet Union created twin-engine high-altitude interceptors using insights gained from the Lightning. The strategy of leveraging technology for overwhelming advantage became central to American military doctrine. For Japan, this experience drove their post-war self-defense forces to prioritize quality over quantity, focusing on advanced technology instead of mass mobilization. The scars of technological inferiority left a lasting mark on Japanese military thought. The surprise that Japanese pilots felt when they could not outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning signified the end of an era in air warfare. The age of the individual warrior pilot, where skill and bravery decided victory, faded over the Pacific skies. It gave way to industrial age warfare, where technology, production capabilities, and systematic innovation determined the outcomes. Saburo Sakai's reflections after the war revealed how the P-38 shattered the morale of the Zero fighter pilots. It was more than just speed or better climbing. The P-38 symbolized a style of warfare that Japan could not compete with. The surviving Japanese pilots learned a tough lesson. In modern warfare, courage without technology becomes futile rather than heroic. The P-38 Lightning not only took down Japanese aircraft, it dismantled an entire worldview regarding warfare, honor, and national strength. Their shock came from realizing that all their beliefs about air combat were misguided. The Zero, which had seemed unstoppable, was no longer a match. Invincible in 1941, it became outdated by 1943. Pilots who trained for years in aerial combat found their skills useless against an enemy that would not engage on those terms. The twin-tailed devil, haunting Japanese pilots' nightmares, symbolized more than just a superior fighter aircraft. It represented American industrial power, technological advancement, and a systematic approach to warfare that shaped the second half of the 20th century. Saburo Sakai, Japan's most renowned fighter ace, survived the war and reflected on its lessons. He said the P-38 taught us the hardest lesson of all. The age of the samurai had ended. In the skies over the Pacific, we faced the future, and it defeated us. The shock of that encounter still resonates today. It reminds us that in the harsh reality of war, technology and industrial strength ultimately prevail over tradition and individual bravery. Japanese pilots, unable to outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning, learned this lesson at the cost of their lives, their aircraft, and their empire's dreams of dominance. They challenged the arsenal of democracy with the spirit of the samurai. The P-38 Lightning was democracy's response, delivered at 400 miles per hour from 30,000 feet with a precision that no amount of courage could overcome.